Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Joan Brzezinski and I'm the director of the China Center. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the University of Minnesota China Center's Considering China webinar with Professor Claudia Huang. Thank you for your support of the China Center and the Considering China webinar series. And I wish to offer a special thanks to Kai Mei and Joseph Terry for their generous support of this program. We will have a Q&A session just directly following the presentation. So please submit your questions via the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the program. Our speaker today is Professor Claudia Huang. She is an anthropologist and assistant professor of human development at California State University, Long Beach. Her focus is on personal identity and meaning making among elders. I'm particularly interested in how cultural norms surrounding aging process can be altered or upended by social change, she says. She's the author of Dancing for Their Lives, The Pursuit of Meaningful Aging in Urban China, which was recently published with a series on global aging at Rutgers University Press. Please welcome Professor Huang for her presentation, Play Day, Count a Day, Planning for Old Age in Contemporary Urban China. Welcome, Professor Huang.
Thank you so much. I want to extend my gratitude to the University of Minnesota and the China Center for having me today. I'm very excited to share my research with you all. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my slides. Go ahead and get started. All right. Okay. Again, thank you. My name is Claudia Huang. I am an assistant professor of human development at California State University, Long Beach. As John said, I am an anthropologist. I received my PhD in anthropology from UCLA, and I conducted my research in Chengdu, China. And the talk today is titled Play a Day, Count a Day, kind of a silly name, but you'll see why I've titled that talk the way I have. I very much look forward to your questions and feedback at the end of this talk. So please do share any and all thoughts that you have as I'm speaking. Okay. So a bit of an outline of the talk, just so you know where we're going. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research background, give you a bit of context about this particular talk and also the whole research story. Then I'm going to share some stories from the field, which is something that anthropologists love to do, right? So as an ethnographic researcher, a lot of my research was what's called deep hanging out. So I have a lot of stories from the field that I'll share with you. And then we'll get to this concept that I think emerged from my research called play a day, count a day. I'll explain what that means in analytical context, and then finally we'll move on to the discussion. All right, so that's how things are going to go. And so a bit of context. So this talk is based on a chapter of my recently published book, Dancing for Their Lives, that just came out in February with Rutgers University Press. Can find more information at the QR code if you are so inclined. And the book itself is based on dissertation research that I conducted between 2014 and 2018 on the so-called dancing grannies phenomenon or Guangchangwu phenomenon in urban China. I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with this phenomenon, but just to get us all on the same page, this phenomenon consists of an estimated 100 million people throughout China, most of them women, who are referred to colloquially as dama, which directly translates to big mother, but means something closer to like auntie. This phenomenon has received a lot of media coverage. And so even when I started the research way back in the mid 2010s, there was just a lot of media coverage in both in China and in the international media and in the Western English language media. But most of this coverage was quite surface level, meaning that a lot of the media coverage focused on the spectacle of the phenomenon. So how much space the women were taking up, the noise, and particularly the altercations that were occurring between the dance groups and other urban residents. So famous examples include the instance where I'm sure some of you have heard of this when I think it was somebody in Changsha, or it was either Changsha or Wuhan, who was so angry about the dance groups underneath his apartment making so much noise that he threw a bucket of feces out his window. onto the dance groups below. There was a more recent case of somebody who opened fire on a dance group. I actually don't know. When I heard about this, I was like, where did this man get a gun? It's very difficult to get a gun in China. But anyway, somebody did open fire on a dance group. So these altercations take up a lot of space in the media. But when I was doing this research, I realized that there is so much more to the story of these dance groups. So in my book, I've tried to go beyond the spectacle and instead focus on how retired women try to make sense of their lives as they grow older. Um, in other words, the pursuit of meaningful aging, which is the subtitle of the book. So, as an anthropologist, I did conduct ethnographic research, and namely participant observation as my primary method when I was doing this research. And this means that I joined two dance groups, right? I tried as much as possible to um, see what these retired women in dance groups were doing on the ground on their own terms. So on the bottom right here, you see a photo of me when I was in graduate school. That's a mirror selfie at a dance studio with one of my dance groups. Yeah, way back when I still had enough energy to put contact lenses in. So in addition to dancing with these two groups, I also participated in social activities as much as possible. I joined their WeChat groups. So most of these dance groups have very active social media WeChat groups. So I joined those. Talk more about that in a bit. I attended dance competitions. One of my dance groups was very active in dance competitions. I'll talk more about the dance competitions later. They did not let me compete because I'm a terrible dancer, and to be honest, I never really improved during the course of my time doing this research. So I never was part of the dance competitions, but they did let me go and take pictures and observe. I also attended Shichi sponsored activities, so local government sponsored activities for older adults in the neighborhoods. Sometimes the local neighborhood would organize events for holidays where dance groups would be invited to come showcase their talents or put on a presentation or a show. So I basically tried to be part of their lives, daily lives, as much as possible. In addition to this, I also conducted in-depth interviews with most dance group members, so about 60 people across these two dance groups. And a big majority of these in-depth interviews included life history interviews, and that allowed me to get an understanding of their current post-retirement lives in the context of their entire life. So in sum, I wrote this book to tell a different kind of story about the dancing grannies and about this phenomenon, and also about growing older in urban China. Because this is usually the story that you see about urban China, and aging in China is a very big story. It's often told through the lens of demographic change. And if you look at these two population pyramids, you'll see that that lens is usually highlighted for good reason. This is probably familiar to most of you, but China has the world's fastest aging population. Birth rates have absolutely plummeted despite the elimination of the one-child policy and recent efforts to convince younger people to have larger families. So most of these efforts have not borne fruit, and the birth rate continues to decline. So if you look at these population pyramids side by side, the one on the left is from 1957, which is the average year that most of my interlocutors were born in. So most women that I worked with were born in 1957. That's the median year. And then on the right, you see that's 2024. So if you're not familiar with how to read a population pyramid, each horizontal bar represents a percent of the total population. So if a population pyramid looks like a pyramid, what you have is a population that's dominated by younger people, and then there's fewer and fewer older people at the top. But if you look at the population pyramid on the right, you'll see that China's current demographic makeup is not really a pyramid. It's more like an olive, perhaps. So we have most of the population is sort of in the middle. You have this bulge in the middle, and you see that there's not very many young people there at the bottom, meaning that it's unlikely that the pyramid will ever return to a pyramid shape, at least anytime in the near future. And it's actually looking like perhaps at some point this pyramid is going to flip upside down, right? It's going to become top heavy. An upside down population pyramid is a threat to sustaining economic growth. Many other countries are in a similar boat. So the United States, if you look at the United States population pyramid, it looks similar to this. Certainly Western European countries, Japan, South Korea, they all look something like this. And they're undergoing similar changes in terms of smaller families, people not having children, etc. But in China, what's really remarkable is that this change occurred over the course of a single generation due to the one-child policy. This rapid change impacts family dynamics, it impacts the medical system, social welfare, and ultimately social stability. So that's why this story has really dominated in the popular and in the scholarly discourse. But again, I think that there is more to the story, and it's important to highlight some of the other things that are going on beneath the surface. I conducted this research in order to look at some of the things that I think have so far been overlooked. So the cultivation of individual identity and interests in later life, I think is something that behooves us to pay greater attention to. And the relationship between policy and intimate experiences of the life course, new understanding and practices of old age. So what it means to be an old person in urban China today is not what it meant one generation, two generations, three generations ago. And also, I wanted to take a close look at the creation of shared aesthetics and value systems among retiree social groups. So as these women get together and grow old together, they're creating sort of new ideas of what it means to be an older person in China. And it's interesting to see how those new values and aesthetics reverberate into the rest of Chinese society. So I think focusing on these matters instead can help us move beyond assumptions about how to solve the population aging problem, and understand how older adults are navigating the aging process themselves, right? How are older adults actually thinking about growing older? And so for the rest of the talk, I'm going to share 3 stories from my time in the field that illuminate how retired women in dance groups are thinking about old age. All right. First story is titled Porridge Money. I was first attracted to the dancing phenomenon, this Guangchangwu phenomenon, because the participants seem so joyful. There's so many colors. So if you've been to urban China in recent years, you'll know there's so many colors, there's laughter, there's movement. It's just a really fun phenomenon to witness. And when I first started doing this research, women in the dance groups would often tell me how completely and utterly happy they were. Well, for example, when I was doing preliminary research about 10 years ago, I was going around Chengdu just asking as many people as possible who were in dance groups, why did you choose to join a dance group? A lot of people told me some version of this, so I'll just kind of read this. One of them sort of exuberantly replied, "We are the luckiest generation of Chinese women to have ever lived," and lucky she meant 幸福. No, really, we don't have to work. We're not so poor, and we just have to mind our own mental and physical health. We have such freedom. It's so wonderful. This was a very common sentiment that I heard throughout my preliminary research. It was repeated by a lot of people that I spoke to. But as I got to know people better, a darker narrative began to emerge. So as I started doing more in-depth interviews with members of those dance groups that I joined, the starkest example that I can think of is during an interview with 2 women I called Auntie Li and Auntie Wu after knowing both of them for about 2 years. Auntie Li responded to my question about what is the state of older people in China today? She responded, things look good if you're doing a shallow observation, but if you were to come back in 20 years, you would see a disaster. Come back when we're in our 70s and 80s and our kids are in their 50s. It will be a disaster. Auntie Li and Auntie Wu then went on to share a very long list of grievances during our conversation. So they covered subjects like the one-child policy, government corruption, condescending and ineffective policies, and the exorbitant cost of medical treatment. They also complained that they dreaded getting older and needing care because they each just have one child due to the one-child policy. They know that the chances of being able to age at home under that child's care were slim. Then they kind of talked about elder care facilities. I asked, what about elder care facilities? They complained that the nice ones are too expensive. They would never be able to afford them on their meager pensions. And then the affordable ones were either really inadequate and shabby, in their words, or they had very, very long wait lists, and you couldn't rely on being able to get into one of them. At one point, Auntie Lee said, when you get old, you just have to let go of any hope you have for the future. This was very surprising to me when I heard them talk this way, because again, this was about 2 years into my research, and this was really the first time that I had heard this sentiment so explicitly expressed. So I asked them, if you're so worried and if you have so many resentments about your current predicament, why do you spend so much time dancing? Both of these women spent about 30 hours a week on dancing and leisurely activities, karaoke, things like that. So, for me, this was sort of a puzzle. If they seemed so angry and so resentful, and yet they spent the majority of their waking hours on creating joy, right? So this is what Auntie Wu said. She said, yes, we dance and we're happy. They say that if you don't dance and if you don't play mahjong, then you'll start paying attention to politics. Here, the two of them they broke out into a hearty laugh when they said that. So they keep us dancing and playing, and we're happy when we dance. Foreigners must come here and think Chinese people are so happy. They play mahjong and dance all day. What they don't know is that our hearts are actually full of bitterness. When I asked them if they had any plans to secure a stable old age for themselves, they both said no. They insisted that there was nothing that they could do. They can't go back in time to have more children. They don't have the means to buy more or better insurance. So instead, they said that what they were just going to do was focus on enjoying themselves as much as they can while they can. So play a day, count a day. The future, they said, was frightening, but for now they have their porridge money. And in the Sichuanese vernacular, porridge money, or xifan means having the resources for the bare necessities of life, but nothing more, right? So in times of famine, people in China eat porridge, so watered down rice, as a way to just survive. And that's kind of like the barest meal that you could have. So having porridge money means that they have just enough. But they have just enough for now, and they don't know how much longer that's going to last. So they're just going to play a day, count a day. Again, I was surprised to hear this at the time, but their sentiments are actually not surprising when you pull back and consider the trajectory of their lives. So at the beginning of this talk, I explained that I joined WeChat groups as part of my research when I joined these two dance groups. I actually had to mute notifications on my phone when I joined these WeChat groups, because I discovered that these dance groups, the people in these dance groups were sending each other hundreds of messages a day. So this really also goes against the stereotype that social media is dominated by younger adults. In fact, this was not the case. They spent a lot of time on their phones sending each other memes and like little links and GIFs and funny pictures all day long. And most of these messages that they were sending one another were about nothing. It was just a lot of like recipes and little stickers and images. And most of the time, people wouldn't even respond. So like you would see just like chat transcripts just full of pictures one after another. Nobody would actually comment on each other's posts. They would just send in their own posts one after another over and over again. This was different. So one morning, this particular meme that you see on the left side of the screen appeared in one of my chat groups. And just go over this. So it's an image of four People's Daily headlines. People Daily is the piece of the Chinese Communist Party newspaper. And it's from 1985, 1995, 2005, 2012. So the headlines stacked on top of each other say 1985, having one child is good, the government will provide elder care. 1995, having one child is good, the government will help provide elder care. 2005, do not rely on the government for elder care. And 2012, delaying retirement is good, rely on oneself for elder care. Um, so when this meme appeared, a lot of real and sustained discussion ensued among the group members. People said things like, wow, they've really fooled us. Um, somebody else said, like, how am I supposed to delay retirement? I got laid off back in the early 2000s during the SOE reforms. So, when it comes to the business of aging, many people of this generation feel very much betrayed. The ground shifted beneath them too quickly before they were able to make alternative plans. And one thing I'll say about the meme is that when it first appeared, I really tried to look into whether these headlines were real, like whether the People's Daily actually did publish these headlines. I couldn't confirm these exact headlines, but these slogans did exist. So these were real slogans that existed during these respective time periods. But when I raised this question to women in the dance group, I said, like, do you think that this meme is actually somebody took four newspapers and stacked them, or do you think this is Photoshop? They said, we don't care. The response I got was, it doesn't really matter if this particular image is real. This captures the reality that we lived through. And so there was just a lot of discussion about this when it came up. And in one conversation I had with a woman I called Auntie Young, she had this to say in response to the meme. We were the generation that got the worst of it. When we were young, they demanded so many sacrifices from us. And in return, they promised us that they would educate our children, make sure we have jobs, and then take care of us when we're old. Now they have done nothing. In her case, nothing is a bit of an exaggeration. So Auntie Young is a retired high school teacher. She has a very good pension, relatively speaking. She travels a lot. So she and her husband, this is before COVID, she and her husband were taking like 2 road trips per year. They have an SUV, so they would pack up this SUV and just, go see the sights in China with some of their friends. They have a condo in Hainandao, the island, which is another big thing. I think Hainan is basically an elder resort at this point. They went on international cruises. Um, and she spent a lot of time with her fellow Dama. From the surface, it really looked like she was living the life. She spends at this time several days a week at various social groups that she belonged to. She had a dance group, she had a choir group, she had a walking group that she belonged to. And yet, even her, Auntie Young, somebody who lives really what I think many people would consider a dream post-retirement life, she has still harbored a lot of anxiety and resentment about the state of elder care. Um, and yet these anxieties have not translated to concrete plans. So I asked her, I hear these resentments. What's your plan? And she said, I have no plan. It doesn't matter. She said instead, the same thing as Auntie Lee and Auntie Wu earlier, she's going to squeeze as much enjoyment out of life while she can, um, as much as she can. Okay. All right. I think the third story is what I've been thinking of in my head. I called it in my head the double calamity. What adds to the Dama generation's resentment is the fact that they're caught precisely in the middle of a seismic shift from one form of a family system to another. The traditional form, of course, is based on filial piety, right, where elders are cared for at home by adult children and also given a place of honor in the family system. But there is this new emerging form of family that has been developing really since the beginning of the 20th century, um, which sees a greater emphasis on investing in and caring for children rather than venerating elders. This is sort of a familiar complaint of the sandwich generation throughout the world. You're kind of squeezed between having to care for children and also having to care for the elders in your family. But in the case of urban China, there's this added dimension of shifting cultural values as well. All right, so I'm going to tell you the story of the double calamity. So this is a woman in one of my groups. She Both of her parents were in their 90s, and one day her mother was going downstairs of their apartment building and she tripped on the stairs and she dislocated her shoulder, or she hurt her shoulder. She goes to the hospital to get it checked out. She has the misfortune of encountering a young and rather inexperienced doctor who, without taking an x-ray, just assumed that the shoulder was dislocated. So he pulled on her arm to try to put the socket back into place. But because her bones were brittle, he broke her arm instead. So what should have been just kind of a simple sprain, it was actually not dislocated. She could have just kept it on ice for a couple of days, turned into a medical crisis. She was hospitalized in order to treat this broken arm. Meanwhile, her husband, who by my interlocutor's account, had never taken care of himself for a day in his life, was now by himself at home because his wife was hospitalized. So when he tried to cook himself dinner one night, he tripped in his kitchen and then broke his hip. All right, so now what we have is two elderly parents in two separate hospitals on different ends of the city. So the woman that I spoke to, she was working in shifts along with her two siblings, trying to take care of both of their parents at the same time. They were absolutely worn thin. She was absolutely worn ragged. And she took 3 months off to take care of her parents during this acute medical crisis. Afterwards, when they were both recovered and at home, thankfully, we went on a social outing with the dance group, and she was reflecting on what had happened with her parents. And she reflected that her own son would never be able to take care of her the way that she cared for her parents. He was raised with very different expectations, and as an only child, he simply would not or may not be able to provide that same level of care because, again, she was taking shifts with her two siblings. Her son has no siblings. One of the other women on this social outing asked, "So, what do you think is going to happen when we get old and need care?" And she responded, "They'll carry us out and throw us away." I heard some version of this a lot. Most people said it in a tongue-in-cheek way, but it was repeated enough that it took on a serious meaning of its own. And the same can be said for play a day, count a day. This was one of the most frequent phrases I heard when I spoke with retired women about elder care and their plans for old age. And the Sichuanese dialect is full of colorful terms and expressions that carry multi-layered meanings. And this phrase "shua yitian, swan yitian," that's play a day, count a day in Sichuanese, is a prime example. So on the simplest level, shua or swa in Sichuanese means to play. So to use it in everyday language, a mother might send her child outside to schwa, or somebody else might be described to be like schwaing a video game. So that's how that word would be used. It can also mean engaging in leisure, entertainment, or travel activities. So you could say that you have plans to spend the day at the mall to schwa, or you can ask somebody where they're going to schwa on their upcoming vacation. And finally, this word can also mean dissipation or decadence. To say that a child likes to schwa is also to mean that she's not studious or she's not serious. To say that a young adult spends her time engaging in schwa is also to say that she is immature or unfocused. In each case, the word calls to mind a carefree or unserious or an idle attitude. For retired women with so many serious cares to so readily claim this term and give it such a central place in describing their lives is, I think, a significant development, something to pay close attention to. Many women profess that they have no hopes for the future and only focus on finding enjoyment in the present moment. But I also continue to hear people say that they felt tremendously fortunate, the 幸福. Sometimes the same person offered these opposing points of view on separate occasions. It was like the enjoyment and the bitterness were two halves of the same whole, or maybe two ends of a seesaw that continuously teeters back and forth. And so let me just end with some thoughts, analytical thoughts about the meaning of play a day, count a day. think the dancing grannies phenomenon or the Guangshanwu phenomenon appears fundamentally unserious, right? So when I tell people, when I told people that I was conducting research on this, the most common response would be like, "Oh, that's really fun. Like, what a fun research project you have." And indeed, I think the Dharma themselves in China have a reputation for being unserious or even frivolous. So the way they're portrayed in Chinese media, and if you kind of ask um, an average person in China, like, what do you think about Dharma? They'll usually tell you something like, "Oh yeah, they're fun." Like they know how to have fun. Um, they do a lot of dancing. They know how to enjoy themselves. But the whole thing takes on the veneer of being frivolous and unserious. But I think what I show in my research is that the Dhamma, in fact, are acutely aware of the echoes of history that continue to affect their lives in untold ways, almost as acutely as they're aware of their own impending old age and mortality. And during the course of my research, there was a palpable sense percolating just beneath the surface that the good days were numbered. But the vast majority of Dhamma choose to focus on finding joy in the daily routines of texting friends, dancing, cooking, caring for grandchildren, and socializing, rather than spend energy trying to forestall a potentially bleak old age. For them, the past events that set them upon this trajectory can't be undone. So why bother with bitter thoughts more than is absolutely necessary? And yet, of course, there are moments when the feelings of resentment and fear bubble to the surface. So I think these stories that I've just told highlight how these moments are triggered and how they're assimilated back into this worldview that the Dhamma make for themselves and for each other. More significantly, I think in my research, I find that these most of these episodes where the resentment and the fear bubble up, these moments are meaningfully decentered in these women's lives through jokes, irony, and focus on leisurely activities that fall under this catch-all of schwa or play, right? So these will come up, but then they usually pass. They do not ruminate on them. So I'll leave you with a parting thought before we go into the Q&A, which I'm really looking forward to, is that this attitude of play day, counter day, is not so much a flippant dismissal of reality, but rather a strategy to cope with it. As anthropologist Thomas Malaby writes, play is a kind of readiness to improvise in the face of an ever-changing world. And I think that's exactly what the Dhamma are doing here. In the absence of good solutions, so a plan for aging that might actually work, an assurance that might put their worries to rest, or some kind of new forecast about the future that can sweeten the bitterness of the past, they simply focus on living well while they can, however they can. Having fun now is all that is guaranteed. Okay, that concludes the formal part of my presentation, and I very much look forward to hearing your feedback and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed the talk, and it is really excellent research. And I'm wondering myself, just has there been any sort of social movements by senior citizens, like any kind of demonstrations or pushback or sort of organized requests from the government to do something about the situation, or not really?
Not meaningfully so, no. And first of all, it's really difficult to mobilize. As you know, it's very difficult to mobilize, certainly in person, but also in the online space. And I think I'll talk about this a little bit later, which is that during the latter few years of my research, there was increasing censorship on WeChat, where some of these discussions that were beginning to take place about resentments that people were harboring about what had happened to their generation, those were becoming censored. So it was difficult to have any conversations involving larger groups of people that could snowball into any kind of social movement.
Thank you. What percentage of old age cohort is in the dance group? Can you say anything about those who are not in dance groups?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think by my calculations, it's about 7% of the total Chinese population. So it really depends on what region of the country you're looking at, but I would say conservatively, at least 1 in 4 people who are retired are in a dance group. I would say about 1 in 2 women. People who are not in dance groups are very obviously most men. And in the introduction of my book, I have this section titled "What about men?" Because the people were asking me that a lot, and I'll be very frank with you. I was annoyed by that question because I was like, don't we have enough research about men? Like, can't we talk about the women for once? Um, but quite seriously, I think it's outside of the purview of this particular research project to address the men. But that is something I asked my interlocutors a lot. Is just like, what are your husbands doing while you're out here? Like, what's happening with them? Um, in in the Sichuanese dialect, people usually answer this question with with this catchphrase that appears in the Sichuanese dialect, which is old women are outside fighting for their lives, and old men are inside waiting to die. And that's how that's how the title of the book came about. So it's so older men, there is no comparable social phenomenon involving older men, but there are certainly like post-retirement social groups with older men. So something that you people in the audience probably have seen this as well in Chinese cities. That you see small groups of older men in the parks taking pictures of birds and flowers. Like that seems to be one sort of social activity. Older men sometimes are in the park playing chess, Chinese chess, or doing calligraphy on the ground. Like that seems to be another kind, but it doesn't have as huge of a following as this phenomenon does. Um, a lot of my interlocutors said that their husbands were at home like playing computer games. So computer games, like just like surfing the internet and day trading, among the people who were a little bit well off seem to be the primary hobbies of the older men. So that's,
You,
you know, what the
do you
older
sense
men.
there's a significant difference in mental health between aging women and aging men?
Yes. There, yes. In my own observations, the older men took retirement a lot harder. They had a much harder time transitioning to retirement. And this is not just in China. This seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. And, I think this is due to gender differences in how men are treated in the workplace. Men usually are investing more of their identities into their careers. So when they leave that career, it can be a harder transition. But also in China, this is exacerbated by the mandatory retirement ages, right? So for this generation, women in blue collar jobs are retiring at 50, in white collar jobs at 55. The men do not retire until age 60. So for women, they're retiring at earlier ages, which means that they have more time to cultivate hobbies, etc. And also when they're retiring, it's more likely that their children are not yet completely grown, so they're still needed in some areas of their lives. For the men, by the time they retire, it's kind of like it's much more of a sudden cliff of losing the workplace sociality, and also their children are grown, so it's just kind of all to nothing very quickly. So that can be a really dramatic change. So a lot of the Dhamma that I spoke to expressed concern about their husbands one way or another. Like he seems to be
Any
depressed.
comments on children's concerns about their welfare of their aging parents?
You mean just a oh, is Haiyan going to answer this question live? I'm confused. Okay.
No.
Adult children, does that mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think a lot of the I didn't focus on interviewing people basically of my generation, right? Of like whether they're concerned. And the truth of the matter is, people of my generation, especially 5, 10 years ago when I was doing most of this research, were not concerned yet about their parents because they were in their 30s, and their primary concern at that time was taking care of their children and advancing their own careers. Their parents, were still in their like 60s, and it was not a big concern at the time of them needing care.
So, do the women in the dance groups generally not have grandchildren to care for? Is that
No, they do.
phase of their life over?
Yeah, they do. So in another chapter of this book, I actually talk about this in detail. Every single, let me think, with the exception of 2 women, every single person that I spent time with in these 2 dance groups was a grandmother. And most of them engaged in some kind of care work and for these grandchildren. And what was so interesting was the conflicts that would arise in the groups surrounding caring for grandchildren. The chapter in the book that talks about this is called Families Under Peer Pressure, because what was happening was that the people in the dance groups would pressure each other to spend as little time as possible caring for their grandchildren. And it was a way of fighting against this emerging family system where elders were losing clout and children were receiving most of the resources in the family. So when a woman would welcome a new grandchild, other people in the group would often tease her or in some cases bully her into returning to the dance group as soon as possible. The idea being that, why would you invest so much time in your grandchildren when you are not going to be able to basically receive the benefit of the care work, right? This is not going to be reciprocal for you. So any time that you sacrifice on behalf of your adult children is not going to be paid back. It was not always that explicit, but in some cases it was. So yes, they do have grandchildren to take care of, but it's not so simple. Yeah, it's not so simple as all of them loved being grandmothers or like loved doing that care work. It was a lot of them were quite ambivalent about it.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from our participants? Well, in that case, I guess we're wrapping up here. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I am hard to believe that this is the last one of our webinars for this academic year. We hope that you enjoy a very nice summer, and we'll see you again in the fall. So thanks to Professor Huang for joining us today and sharing with us about her research and her book, and looking forward to reading it myself. And I hope that we all can appreciate her conversation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Right. Bye-bye.